there, it's Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. I have a really fun technique. It's kind of like double embossing. We are going to be layering embossing, but not on top of each other, but doing lots of layering to create a fun technique and some gorgeous cards. So to start off with, I'm going to be using some Distress Oxide inks today. You absolutely don't have to use Oxides. Use whatever you have in your stash and whatever kind of ink you like blending with. I am using the domed foam blenders. I like these best when I'm blending. It's all I use now for blending. But the best thing about this technique is you do not have to make this look good at all, because this is the first layer and we are not going to cover this up, but I am doing a really light layer. So you can see I'm actually dabbing off ink up the top there because I don't want this to be dark at all. You don't really have to blend the two colors together. I just tried to make sure there wasn't really any white space. Now for quick blending, this one didn't turn out too badly, but here's the one I did just before this, and it's a bit interesting. For this one I used a couple of colors. I used Shaded Lilac and Seedless Preserves for the two kind of purples. Now I'm not going to lie, these two purples don't necessarily go together very well. I find Seedless Preserves a little bit hard to kind of mix with different things, but for the minute I promise this will go okay. Now this is the stamp set I'm going to be using today. This is Sentimental Flowers from Simon Hurley, and I am just using these gorgeous big leaves out of here. I do really love this stamp set, and it's one I've definitely kept around. It's earned its place in my little small crafting space. So I have got 3 different sizes of flowers here, and I'm just going to pop these onto some acrylic blocks. And this is where you need to make sure your pieces are really dry, because we are going to be doing some embossing. Now I like to check this, because if you go ahead and things don't work out well, then it can be frustrating. So I tend to take a test, tip some embossing powder on, make sure nothing is clinging, and then I know that I'm good to go with the next step. So I'm using some VersaMark sticky embossing ink, and I am going to take the medium and the small leaf and just stamp them anywhere around my patch. I'm not going to stamp too many of them too close together, because we are going to be layering more embossing onto this, not on top of each other on purpose. So I'm just adding a little few, and I know that it's a little bit tricky to see where you are stamped. Even I'm having to kind of look and guess quite a lot at this point, and that will become evident when you see where I kind of landed with some of the stamping. But the one that I thought I wasn't going to like actually turned out to be my favorite one. So interesting. But this one here, you can see that I did not put the leaves on evenly. I know that it's really hard to kind of see where they are, but I accidentally left that big space in the middle. But you do want to leave spaces, so that is the important thing. You can also do this with any stamps at all. It does not have to be leaves, it does not have to be flowers, it could be anything that you want to create your background out of. So I am going to do the same thing here with this purple one. I've made sure it's nice and dry. I'm using my VersaMark. VersaMark is I have tried a lot of embossing inks, and I've come back to this one time and time again. I cannot find anything that stamps like this one, although I will say it is worth getting the re-inker to this, and then your pad will last you a really long time. So a good quality sticky embossing ink is worthwhile, plus the re-inker. So for the first layer, we want to make sure we use clear embossing powder. This is because we want to trap the color, the light color that is underneath our embossing. So that is literally what we are doing. We are trapping it under there so that we can't change that color from here. We want it to stay put. So once I have melted all of these, it is still a little bit hard to see, but I mean, I can see them perfectly well myself, and you guys can see them a little bit if I tilt them in the light. You can see that there are gaps, they are not even, they are kind of anywhere around the place. And this is where I'm going to add our second layer. Now I'm taking exactly the same colors. I'm not taking anything darker. I'm just simply adding more ink, a heavier application of the same colors, and I'm staying in the same places as where I originally had the ink. So here is where I add a little bit of that mint tape, that low tack tape to my fingers. I put the sticky side up to my fingers, and that way I'm not going to get fingerprints all through my ink blending. And this time I'm just adding a heavy application, and I know that it still doesn't look great, so bear with me, because I promise this is going to look good. I am taking a dry paper towel and rubbing it over top of the leaves that we've already embossed, because that will take off any excess ink that is sitting on top of my already embossed images. Now I just flip my sheet inside out so that I'm not contaminating colours, but this is where I go over with the shaded lilac, so on top of the shaded lilac, just much more ink. And I must admit, after I had done this and added in the seedless preserves as well, the seedless preserves is actually quite a dark colour. It's actually quite overwhelming, and the shaded lilac is definitely a lighter colour. It's definitely one of those really pale light colours that I love in the Distress Oxide range, but here is about where I decided that actually I was going to add in some wilted violet on top there. I changed my mind, it was just not quite working, so I'm just going over the shaded lilac with some wilted violet, which is actually quite a dark purple, not as dark as the recent one that just came out, but it is the darkest purple that I have. I don't have the newest colours at all, and I'm able to blend this pretty much just a little bit into the other seedless preserves. The blends do not have to be perfect. As I said, these are backgrounds, and trust me, it will all work out okay. Now this is where we are going to add the second layer, so the double layer of heat embossing. You want to make sure at this point, because we have added a really heavy layer of ink, that your pieces are nice and dry. So this is going to take a minute to heat these, and then when I do my little test here, I can see that actually it is not dry. Even though I've had the heat gun on it, this was not going to work out well for me. So I'm glad I caught this. I'm glad I did a test, otherwise this would have been really frustrating had I just gone ahead and done my project. So I'm just going to wipe this off with a little paintbrush. I can still use this embossing powder. It's not colored or tainted or anything. It's absolutely fine. But I do need to make sure I heat it for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to add a really good application of my anti-static powder bag, and then that way I know that I'm going to be good to go, good to carry on. So I have my VersaMark out again. This time I have the large leaf, and I'm going to stamp this in all of the empty spaces. Now the leaves that I stamped originally are not even and not perfect, so I'm really just stamping in the gaps and making the most of it. And as I said, I wasn't sure how this was going to kind of work out because the planning was a little bit average of placement, but I think that just goes to show that you can really pop them anywhere and it doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm still really enjoying the look of this. So I pop it in anywhere I can go. If you think you are picking up any little bit of ink from the colours that we're stamping onto, I just kind of stamped off a couple of times down the bottom there every now and then, and that got rid of any of the colour that was just ever so slightly on my stamp. It was not affecting my VersaMark ink pad at all, so I was fine with that. This time we are going to be using white embossing powder, not the clear. So using white this time around, and these leaves are going to really stand out. And honestly, when you heat emboss these, they become really bright white. So I really love that look. When I'm using embossing powders, I am using these super fine embossing powders, and I find that that captures the details of these images really, really well, because these ones in particular have a lot of very fine lines. So I guess it depends on your image. But the superfine ones work really well for me because that way I can do really intricate images, but for solid images they work just as well. So I always go for the superfine ones. And here is the finished look of the double embossing. Now we are going to quickly turn them into cards. I'm going to trim these down a bit and trim off the pieces that I don't necessarily care for, or they had fingerprints in the sides, and this is me just deciding which part I wanted to take off. So I'm trimming these down to be 4 by 5¼ inches, so it leaves that gorgeous little white border around the outside. I did decide to add a little bit more here. This is my little trick. Instead of adding a matting layer, I'm using the Warm Breeze VersaFine Clear ink. This is a pigment ink, so it's going to layer up on top of the oxides really nicely. However, before I take off my little piece of mint tape, I have got that little piece of kitchen towel there so that I can wipe any of the ink off the top of the embossing, and that way it won't transfer at a different point. Because at this time nothing is going to stick to that embossing powder that we melted. No inks will stick on top of that, so just wipe it off and make sure we get rid of that excess ink. And this way I have created a little matting border without having to actually add another piece of paper behind it. Now my circles here, I always have a little stash of these die cut because they are so handy. I generally have them cut out in vellum and in white paper, and that way I can colour them if I need to with inks. This is the rings around the circle Spellbinders set, so I think there are 4 dies in here, and then the plain white circles, I always have a stash of these cut, and these are just from the Hero Arts Infinity die set, and again these are just things that I use all the time, so make sure that I have some die cut ready to go. So I'm going to be using these for a few little sentiments today. And I really like these because the circles kind of layer up inside of the vellum and yet leave that decorative edge just for that little bit of extra detail in these cards. Now this stamp set, the Sentimental Flowers one, has some beautiful big gorgeous sentiments, and I could use pretty much any of these. I just pop my little circle behind it here and make sure I can fit whatever the words are onto my circle. That way I don't have to kind of stamp and guess. I'm using that same Warm Breeze VersaFine clear ink. These are pigment inks and they stamp absolutely beautifully. That's the reason that I have them. So I have the Sending Hugs one. I've popped the sentiment up on some foam squares and then popping it down onto that vellum decorative circle. And then from here, I don't need to add any more dimension, so I'm just going to add some liquid glue onto the back there. This is the Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish. That's what's inside these little glue bottles, and this is a really strong glue. So once I know that this is dry, it is good to go, and it is matte, so it means that anything that squishes out the side or seeps out is not going to show at all, which is really important to me in my card making. Then I'm going to pop down my whole layer onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base, and that gives that gorgeous white border. It brings out those leaves, it brings out the sentiment, and everything is coordinating nicely at this point. I'm going to pop this aside to let all of that glue dry whilst I just quickly pop the other one together. This one I'm going to stamp in the VersaFine Onyx Black color. This is a thank you stamp. Pop it down, and for this one I decided not to use the little vellum circles that I had cut out. Although it looks absolutely gorgeous, I thought I would change it up just to give you a few other ideas. I'm going to take some leafy dies. This is the Curvy Leaves by Pinkfresh Studios, and I'm taking the largest one here just because this is what I already had die cut and sitting in the back. I'm going to snip this in half, and this is going to come out either side of my little sentiment there. And I was just kind of turning this around, but it seems like the sentiment was made to go down in that spot. It just had the perfect little spot in the gap in the leaves. And then this is how I'm going to pop this one down. I did want to pop some foam dots on the back, but I thought it was easier to attach this just with some double-sided tape. Then I can put those die cuts in exactly the place I want to put them, so kind of arrange them how I wanted them to come out of the side of the sentiment. And then I would add some foam squares and pop this little sentiment up too. As usual, I will have all of the items and products that are still available that I've used in today's video. They will be linked down below in the description box. Sometimes you have to click that little show more arrow or that little grey arrow that points down, and that will kind of bring down all of those options and all of the links that are available that I put there. There are also a few other little bits and pieces of information, including my P.O Box, in case you are planning on sending me a card. I absolutely love receiving your cards in the mail. It makes my day and my children's day when we get to go and check it and we get to pour over the gorgeous cards that you guys have taken the time and effort to send to me. So I appreciate that so very much. Thank you. Now I have popped this card onto the same card base, giving that gorgeous little border, and it really makes it pop. It brings that white all together on the card. I did think these needed a couple of little sparkly bits. You don't have to add them at all, but I kind of felt like I had the right blues there that just seemed to go really well. And then I had some purples for the other card. I use a little wax pencil to pick these up, and the same matte glue is going to glue these on. It will go down a little bit cloudy and then dry perfectly clear, which is exactly what I need when I'm popping on little gems. And these are the 2 cards finished for today. So I hope you enjoyed the double embossing technique. This is a really fun one. If you were inspired by these cards and you would love to share your versions, then our Facebook page is a great place to be able to do this. So come and join us at Come Crafting with Natasha, or again, there'll be a link in the description box below to that. Other than that, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks, bye.